Welcome to Living Well with MS. This podcast comes to you from Overcoming MS, the world's leading multiple sclerosis healthy lifestyle charity, which helps people live a full and healthy life through the Overcoming MS program. We interview a range of experts and people with multiple sclerosis. Please remember, all opinions expressed are their own. Don't forget to subscribe to Living Well with MS on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. And now, let's meet our guest.
Joining me on this episode of Living Well with MS is Steve Hendricks. Steve lives in Boulder, Colorado, and is the author of The Oldest Cure in the World, Adventures in the Art and Science of Fasting, about the history and science of fasting, which is published by Abrams Press, and there'll be information in the show notes about that. So, welcome, Steve.
Great to be with you, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
And could you start off by introducing yourself a bit and tell us about your writing career and what led to you writing about fasting?
Yeah, so I'm a freelance reporter, and most of my writing has been about politics. This book on fasting is my third book. My previous two books, one was about the American FBI, one was about the American CIA and some of the atrocities that they carried out. So this book, in some ways, is quite a departure for me. However, I have been writing about fasting. I first started writing about fasting about 10 years ago. And that was a cover story that I wrote for Harper's Magazine over here in the States. And the emphasis on that was, well, it was sort of a bit like the book. It was a mix of the history of fasting and the science of fasting, but it was built around my own experiences with fasting as well. And that was to do with a 20-day fast that I had done many years ago. And the way I came to writing about fasting was just that I happened to be someone who writes, and I came to fasting for my own reasons. And I came to fasting kind of for two reasons. One was the reason that a bunch of people do it, and that's that after, 15, 20 years of being an adult, I'd put on a pound or so each year, and suddenly I found myself weighing more than I wanted to weigh. So like a lot of people, I wanted to fast to lose weight. I was also interested in fasting, though, and this is perhaps what has propelled my writing interest in it, because I was interested in fasting's long-term effects on our health. I was especially interested in what we could do with our diet to try to live longer. And I had first been drawn to caloric restriction, which is just eating fewer calories each day, which in virtually every animal that's ever been tested has extended their lives incredibly. And in humans, the biomarkers look very impressive. The problem is it is murderously hard to do. You walk around just ravenously hungry all the time. And I thought, this is just a miserable way to live.
That's the entire diet industry, isn't it? That's
exactly right.
Just eat less. Yeah.
Right. Just eat less. But in coming to caloric restriction, I stumbled upon, as a lot of people do, the ultimate caloric restriction, which is fasting, eating nothing. And it turns out the hell of the irony is you actually are less hungry when you eat nothing than when you eat something. And so that's how I sort of got into fasting, and what has sustained me since is this interest in what fasting does for our health in the long term, in preventing us from getting diseases we don't yet have, and reversing some diseases in some cases that we do have.
I would agree with that. I think my experience of fasting is it's not actually that hard, but when you start eating, then you feel hungry. I mean, they call it an appetizer, don't they?
Right.
And I think it is. It gets you, everything that starts going, and you start to become attuned to eating. But actually, if you don't eat, I find for a day I don't feel massively hungry. But then if I start again, when I start eating again, then I feel really hungry. So I feel more hungry when I've started eating after a fast than I did during the fast, which is a bit strange, but
there are physiological reasons for that. And one of them just has to do, it's sort of like the exercise principle. If you've never fasted before and you fast, you skip a couple of meals, you're going to be hungry. But once you've done it and your body knows what to expect, you're less hungry. But also, if you fast long enough, you actually get to a point where you're starting to burn some of your fat. Your fat gets broken down into ketone bodies, famously. That's the root of the ketogenic diet and this state of ketosis you go into on longer fasts. And ketones, researchers have found in the last decade or two, actually suppress your hunger hormones. So when you're burning your own fat, it's this wonderful evolutionary mechanism that takes away the hunger while you're doing that. It's just fantastic.
The evolutionary thing, because surely in a sort of caveman times, if you're really hungry, then making it difficult for you to perform athletically and catch food or hunt, whatever you're doing, is not going to be a good idea. You probably need to be at your peak, don't you? You need to be able to perform.
That's certainly That's certainly the idea. We, of course, don't know. It's all speculation. That may just be a just so story that you just told. But I've told that story, too, because it seems the most likely reason as to why we evolved this way. Your body does quite often make it a little hard for you the first few days of a fast. We can talk about why that is. But once you get more deeply into a fast, once your body is accepted, look, there's no food coming in, it's day 5 or whatever without food. Yeah, we think what's happening is you need to be to have more energy to go out and forage for whatever it was that they were foraging back then. And you need also to be sharper with your senses, which also people report and scientists have found happens quite often with prolonged fasts, so that you can spot that sprig of carrot or whatever that's hiding beneath the leaves or so on, or, see the animal that you're, trying to hunt. These heightened senses and this sometimes heightened energy that people sometimes feel on a fast, not all the time, but sometimes, we think probably came about because of that evolutionary reason that you just gave.
So one of the things that comes up a lot with MS is this idea of leaky gut syndrome, that that it's quite likely that things are getting from the gut into the bloodstream, and then ultimately actually from the blood-brain barrier as well. So it's the things being in the wrong places. So firstly, what is a daily fast, and how can a daily fast help with leaky gut syndrome?
Yeah, so broadly speaking, there are 2 kinds of fasting. There's daily fasting, which is just narrowing your eating window to a shorter amount than you would normally eat in each day, the number of hours you're eating. And then there's prolonged fasting, which is just fasting for multiple days, quite often for weeks, sometimes even for months. So the daily fasting, the reason that scientists have found just in the last 10, 15 years that this is important is that we make more repairs when we are not eating. The longer fast we do, even just our overnight fast, right? Everyone's fasting. We're all fasting overnight. And what scientists have come around to asking is, are we healthier if that fast is longer or shorter each night? And the answer they've come on is that we're healthier when it's longer. And the reason is that our body takes the opportunity of the break from food to step up the amount of repairs that it makes. See, our body's this marvelous self-healing machine that's making repairs all the time, that's sparing us from disease. But most of the time, these repairs are happening at a very low rate. That's because our body is busy with all the other things that make up our lives. And one of those big energy sucks is that we are constantly eating food. It has to digest the food our body does, it has to process the nutrients from the food, and it has to put the nutrients to work in cells, literally in just every part of our body. When we give our bodies a break from that very heavy work, it will do all kinds of amazing repairs that it otherwise doesn't have time to do. It will fix damaged or miscopied DNA, that being enormously important because DNA is our instruction manual for everything that happens in our body. When the manual goes wrong, we get disease and early death. It will increase the recycling of worn out organelles within the cells. It'll break them down into their constituent components and then send them on elsewhere to be used in fresh, new, healthy parts. That's called autophagy. And when these and many other repairs happen, we see some wonderful changes. Drops in systemic inflammation, increase in insulin sensitivity, which is important for moving our glucose out of our bloodstream and into the cells where it belongs, and many other very important changes happen. Now, there's a catch. And the catch is, it's not as though we eat our last food for the night and our body says, okay, we're fasting now, we're going to switch on repair mode. All right. Your body has, there's a metabolic cost to making the switch from, being in your normal fed nutrient processing metabolism to going into repair metabolism. Your body doesn't want to pay that metabolic price until it's sure you're done eating. It doesn't want you to stop eating and then 2 hours later stick another Big Mac or broccoli. It doesn't matter if it's just calories. It doesn't matter if they're healthy or unhealthy. It will disrupt the cycle, and it would have to go back into nutrient processing mode from repair mode. It doesn't want to do that. So what the body does is it waits to start stepping up the repairs, and those start at about 6 hours after our last calories. But even then, the repairs sort of only amp up kind of slowly. And not until 12 hours after our last calories do we get into some, serious kind of overdrive repairs. This is why scientists in the last just handful of years have found that people who eat in an eating window of 12 or fewer hours each day, down to about 6 hours, and the repairs increase, the health improves with every hour you shave off your 12-hour window down to at least 6. These people are getting healthier, and their biomarkers for disease are dropping down. Now, the problem is most of us, surveys show, are eating or drinking something caloric across 14 or 15 hours a day. If you're taking calories 15 hours a day, you're only fasting 9 hours a night, the repairs again don't start till 6 hours into your fast. You're only getting 3 hours of repair a night, right? You're never getting to that overdrive repair at 12 hours. Whereas someone who's doing, say, a 16-8 eating program that most people have probably heard of, you're eating in 8 hours, you're fasting 16 hours a night, you're getting 10 hours of repair. 4 of those hours are in the overdrive repair cycle, right? So this is why longer overnight fasts make us healthy. There's a second part to it, which we can get to later, which is that not all eating windows are created equal, and an eating window earlier in the day is better than later in the day. But that's another story. Sticking with this story of the narrow windows. So there are all these tasks that our body has to do overnight. One of them is repairing the gut. All right. We have a lining that is only one cell thick that separates the food in our gut from the rest of our gut. That lining gets abraded every time food drags across it during the day. That's fine. That's normal. But it's an enormous surface area with about 4,000 square feet of lining in our gut. That's 3 times the size of the square footage of my house. And our body has to scan that every single night. And every single night it needs to replace about 10 to, I think it's 14% of that gut. It's about like recarpeting a couple of bedrooms or something every single night. If it fails to do that, then all kinds of things, food, pathogens, bacteria and viruses and things like that can leak out, and we get leaky gut, and they go in places where we don't want them. And it's conceivable, as you mentioned, that is contributing to or even causing outright MS. There are other repairs that have to go on in the gut as well. For example, we have mucus that helps the food slide across the membrane of our gut without abrading it so much, and the body has to replenish that mucus every night. You probably see where I'm going with this. This is a lot of work. And this is just a small piece of it. We got to clear out all the detritus from our brain activity during the day. We got to, clear out things in our bones. It's happening all over our body. The longer we give our bodies each night to do all this work, the better it does them. If we eat late, eat late and then eat early, if we narrow our fasting window too much, our body will not be able to make these repairs. And chronobiologists, that's biologists who study the timing of our bodies, think that it's highly likely that our long eating windows and narrow fasting windows each night are one of the contributors, in addition to our crappy diet, to leaky gut syndrome.
So you touched on when you eat as well. So that's something I haven't really come across. So it has to be one continuous block. You can't say, oh, I'm going to break up 16 hours of fasting into 2 8s and I'll eat in the middle. I get so you covered that, but when you eat, so I've done 16-8 quite a bit, and I'll do it. I'll sort of do it at both ends of when I'm sleeping. So I won't eat an early breakfast, and I won't eat a late evening meal, and then everything can be in an 8-hour window relatively easily, because your 12 through to 8 or 11 through to 7 is quite manageable. I can eat with the family in the evening. I just have later breakfast. But is there a difference between if you started eating at 8 a.m. and finished at 4 p.m. or if you started at 12 noon and finished at 8 p.m.?
There is, and the way you're doing it is exactly the way I did it. It's the way almost everyone does it. Anyone who's doing 16, 8, 9 chances out of 10, they're skipping breakfast. They're taking their first meal at 11 a.m. or something, and they're finishing eating at 7 p.m. Right? And it makes sense. At least it makes intuitive sense. That's why everyone does it. And it makes sense because we like eating dinner more than we like eating breakfast. It's the most social meal of the day.
Yeah.
Kids come home from school. Everyone's home from work, right? Okay, that all makes sense. However, I have bad news. Scientists have actually done a very good job, and this is very recent science. We're talking the last 3, 4, 5 years. These studies have just been coming out at asking which of those windows is the best. And it turns out what they have found is that our circadian rhythms have just hardwired us to process food most efficiently in the morning and early afternoon. By the mid-afternoon, we start to get poorer and poorer at it. And by nighttime, we're frankly terrible at it. We're just awful. The mechanism that has been best studied with this is the one related to insulin and glucose. Glucose, of course, is just the sugar from the carbohydrates in our meal. It's our body's preferred fuel. Most of our cells want to run on glucose. Insulin moves that glucose out of the arteries after it's been digested and sent into the bloodstream and into the cells where it belongs. And as every diabetic tells you, if you don't move that glucose out of the arteries can get dinged up by the glucose. They will eventually harden, which can lead to kidney disease, strokes, heart attacks, dementia, just all kinds of awful things. We make a ton of insulin in the morning. Our circadian rhythms command it, and we cannot change it. We evolved this way probably because there was, in the plains of Africa where we evolved, there was no reason to be eating at night. Those who ate at night were in danger of being picked off by nocturnal predators. So there was every reason to eat during the daylight hours. But for whatever reason, we make a ton of insulin in the morning. It starts, and our cells are also, through another process, more sensitive to when insulin comes knocking on the door saying, let the glucose in, to hearing the insulin and letting the glucose in. By mid-afternoon, circadian rhythms command our insulin production to shut down. They command our cells to no longer hear the knock of insulin as well. And so the glucose lingers longer in the cells. This circadian rhythm is so powerful that you can take pre-diabetic people, feed them a meal at 7 a.m., feed them the same meal at 7 p.m., their blood sugar will only rise a little bit after the morning meals. They will test many of them fully diabetic after the 7 p.m. meal. You take healthy people, do similar experiments, and after the late meal, some of them will test pre-diabetic. The study that really brought this home to me, that was just a brutal, sad study, was a study of 15,000 attempted suicides in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has just been devastated by the global market. Many of the people there are farmers, and they try to commit suicide when they're just ruined by capitalism by drinking their own pesticides for their crops. What the study found was that people who attempted suicide in the morning were twice as likely to die as people who had attempted suicide by swallowing the poison in the evening. And the reason was that in the morning, their nutrient processing system was so efficient, it had shuttled the poison all over their body. And by the time they were found, rushed to a hospital, it was too late to save them. Those who took the poison in the evening, however, their nutrient apparatus was shutting down. The poison barely moved through their system. And by the time they got to the hospital, they could often be saved. So this is just an extremely powerful window, and there appears to be nothing. It doesn't matter if you change your sleep schedule, your exercise schedule. It doesn't matter if you've been eating on a different schedule for 50 years. We appear to be just powerless to change this. So what scientists have increasingly found is that the healthiest eating window seems to be one that starts about an hour to 2 hours after we wake up in the morning and runs for ideally as short as 6 hours, but it could be longer if it needed to be. So for a lot of people, that would be an eating window of something like 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. or maybe 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Now, I'll close with this, and because this is quite a soliloquy here, but I hated hearing that news. I had, I'm 52. For 49 years of my life, I had eaten dinner, every night that I can remember. I love eating late. My favorite countries to visit are Italy and Spain because you can stay up eating and drinking, and it's just fantastic, right? So I did not want to hear this news. Most of the scientists who stumbled on this research didn't want to hear the news either. But what many, many, many people report is, and this was certainly what I found to be the case, if you make this change, it's as though your body has been waiting for you to do it all along. It was one of the easiest big changes I ever made. It was as though, I assume it's because I was now eating with my circadian rhythms. My eating window is generally about 8:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. or so. And most importantly, in addition to finding I didn't miss dinner, I wasn't hungry, I didn't have any physiological problems, I had a lot of benefits. I instantly noticed my energy getting better. I instantly noticed, within 3-4 days, I had fewer food cravings. I also was someone who had sugar crashes quite often, and those went away. I found my weight vastly easier to manage than ever before in my life. So that's not to say there aren't some social costs, right? And a little flexibility helps. If we're getting together with friends for dinner, we get together for friends with dinner, and I just break my window. But it helps that I'm a freelance writer who works at home, who can set his own schedule. And I know that not everyone can do that. So the final thing that I will say on this is that scientists think that there may be a compromise for people who don't want to or can't eat everything in an early window. And that compromise is simply this: put most of your the vast majority of your calories in that early window, and then keep your dinner light and early. So in practice, that means a bigger breakfast and lunch and just a lighter, earlier dinner. It turns out that adage to eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper, when it was coined in the 1950s, there was no research to support this, but it turns out the nutritionist who coined that got it right. That's pretty good advice. And for people who still want to eat dinner, that may actually be something that would greatly improve their health.
Yeah, our grandparents weren't always wrong. They
right.
They came up with some good stuff as well. For disease prevention, I mean, this is an MS podcast, but I mean, it covers pretty much everything because there's a lot of comorbidities that people with MS don't want to get as well. So just in general, is there a scientific background to the benefits of fasting for disease prevention and cure?
So yes. On these these early time restricted eating windows is what they're known as in the scientific field. There's a lot of very good research for supporting that it will prevent diseases. All the biomarkers that you would expect when you eat in one of these early time restricted windows improve. So if you have high blood pressure, your blood pressure drops. If you are insensitive to insulin, you become more sensitive to insulin. If you have high cholesterol, your cholesterol tends to decrease, and so on. There are also sort of more esoteric but very important and interesting markers that show. There's one great study from just a few years ago that found after just 4 days of eating in one of these early 6-hour windows from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. or so, the amount of autophagy, that was the cellular recycling that I mentioned earlier, these old and worn out parts that are going to cause disease if we don't recycle them, increased 22%. 22% after just 4 days of not changing a thing about what the people ate, only when they ate it, narrower window earlier in the day. All right. So it's very strong when you see all these markers heading in the right direction. Scientists think it's going to prevent a lot of disease. Now, for disease reversal, there you're talking about prolonged fasting. We don't have any data to support that if you eat on a 16-8 early, eating window, that you're going to, reverse your long-standing diabetes or something. You may improve it a little bit, but you're not going to reverse it greatly. You're certainly not going to cure it. We do, however, have more than a century of clinical observations from fasting doctors across multiple generations, multiple countries, mostly in the US, Germany, Russia, who report very credibly many cases of reversals of cardiovascular disease through prolonged fasting. By prolonged fasting, in this case, I'm talking fasts of a week, 2 weeks, sometimes up to 30, 40 days, depending upon the condition. Cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, skin diseases like psoriasis and eczema and acne, asthma, allergies. It's a very long list. Of interest to your listeners, for some reason, fasting doctors routinely report that prolonged fasting is good for autoimmune diseases. So rheumatoid arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, ulcerative colitis. Almost all of this is in the realm of clinical observation because our, human trials and mouse trials and so on, they're almost all funded by pharma companies, by device manufacturers, or by the government, programs that they're not entirely in the pay of big pharma or whatever, but they sort of dance to big pharma's tune, right? And they're, very much in sync with their wishes. So fasting researchers have almost never had the money to conduct good human clinical trials, certainly very few randomized control trials. We do, however, have very good human trials showing that fasting can reverse prolonged fasting, high blood pressure in almost virtually every single case of someone with high blood pressure. It can reverse a very wide range of cases of children with epilepsy. It seems to be less good with adults with epilepsy for reasons that are still being teased out, but epileptics who are resistant to the various anti-seizure medications often respond very well to prolonged fasting. We also, again of interest to your audience, have a very good randomized controlled trial that was done 30 years ago showing that 7 days of fasting can reverse rheumatoid arthritis. 7 days of fasting followed by a vegan and vegetarian diet for the remainder of the year, as opposed to people who didn't fast. The control group just ate normally and so on. This trial was extremely impressive. It was published in one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world, The Lancet. There were other trials that were going on sort of around it that looked at some of the mechanisms for what might be happening. They didn't tease them all out, but they found that the neutrophils are white blood cells that normally attack harmful bacteria. We want our neutrophils to be active and doing that, can sometimes become overactive. And in rheumatoid arthritis, they appear to be part of what's attacking the linings of the joints and inflaming the joints. Anyway, the neutrophils during fasts calmed down. All right. We don't know why. There wasn't enough science and there wasn't enough interest even with this very prominent publication, but it was a very good randomized controlled trial. We don't have a cure for rheumatoid arthritis. You would think that, rheumatologists would be packing off their patients to fasting clinics to see if it would work. Now, it didn't show a complete cure. It was just a 7-day fast. It wasn't a long fast, but these people had better grip strength. They had better motor, capacity. They were less tender in their joints. They woke up less stiff in the morning. It was a very impressive study.
So, because you're talking about prolonged fasting being like 7 days, but you mentioned eating in a 6-hour window. So I think most people, if we go on where people are likely to think that that's possible, if they're coming from nothing, so they're thinking, okay, 16-8, yeah, that sounds quite achievable because a lot of that time I'm asleep anyway. So that's, I think most people could think, yeah, I could manage that. And then if we pushed it a bit further, so is there a benefit? Because I think most people, if they're coming from nothing, would see a 7-day fast as not being achievable at first, at least. But is it worth moving from a 6-hour window or 16-8 through to 24-hour, 36-hour? Do you get a sliding scale of benefits as you move through?
So the answer is we don't have enough science to say where the sweet spot is. I'll tell you what we do know. So I'll go back half a step. If you have multiple sclerosis or you have any diagnosed disorder whatsoever, you shouldn't be fasting, prolonged fasting for 7 or more days on your own. So those are fasts, in a fasting clinic or at least with the supervision of a doctor who's at a fasting clinic and maybe supervising you remotely each day or something. Okay, so that's the first thing. But you're right, that would be very daunting and intimidating to anyone, whatever diagnoses or medications or whatever they're taking and doing, setting all that aside. So yes, people often say, well, what about a 2-day fast, a 3-day fast, and so on? Here's what we know about what happens when we fast. Okay. Your body wants to run on glucose, and that's what it's doing right now for most all of us. After about 24 hours, almost all of us will run out of all the glucose in our body. Glucose that's just sort of floating around from our last meal. We also have glucose that's stored in chains called glycogen in our liver and in our muscles. After about, less than 24 hours for most people, but, no more than about that, we run out of it. And then you're starting to get more into a fasting metabolism. Now, here's another catch. The catch is this. You don't run out of glucose and your body says, we've got all this fat hanging around. Let's run off the fat now. It doesn't do that. It wants to keep running off the glucose, possibly to give you a disincentive to fast, possibly to give you an incentive to go out and keep finding food. It makes life difficult for you because the way that it goes about getting more glucose is by breaking down some of your protein. It breaks down protein in a process called gluconeogenesis, which just means making new glucose. And when it does that, it's extremely inefficient. It's not a good way of going about getting glucose. But on day 2, day 3, day 4 of a fast, that's when this gluconeogenesis is really ramped up and really happening, which is why people often find if they're doing a prolonged fast, the hardest part is that sort of 2nd, 3rd, 4th day. Somewhere in there it varies. Okay, so eventually by day 5 or so, your body says, oh, well, I guess we're not getting any more glucose and I don't want to go through all my protein. By the way, people get freaked out when they hear that your protein's being broken down. We have protein everywhere in our body. It's not like your muscle or your heart is being broken down. It appears to be, our hormones are made out of proteins, most of them, and so on. It appears to be it's taking the old and worn out stuff. It's just breaking that down. And then when we refeed, it'll all rebuild with healthy new stuff is what seems to be going on. Okay, so around day 5 or so, your body says, all right, we're not getting any more glucose. Let's go ahead and burn the fat. And it starts transitioning more and more and more to burning fat. People end up feeling better. So why am I going into all this? I'm going into all this because the story that I've just laid out there seems to be what is happening. But researchers don't have the entire story. And so some fasting doctors have a little bit of a concern. They're like, well, look, why would you fast? If it's 24, 36 hours, fine, not a problem. But 48 hours, 72 hours. Why would you fast into the hardest part of the fast where you may be, going through this metabolic cost thing without getting to the very deeper repairs that we know that happen when you get deeper into ketosis, you're burning your fat and so on. So they're like, look, we think it's just a speculation, but they have good cause to think this. We think rather than doing a 3-day fast this month, and a 3-day fast 2 months from now, and a 3-day fast a couple months, why don't you do a 6-day fast, now, and then another 6-day fast 6 months from now or something, if that's what you want to do, that the benefit would be better that way. Now, if people are just kind of experimenting at home and they want to see what a 2-day fast or a 3-day fast feels like, most fasting doctors say, sure, go for it, try it. But as a sort of regular habitual thing, they have questions. And I'll emphasize, they're just questions. We don't have the data to say, we may find 15 years from now, heck, a 3-day fast is the healthiest thing in the world. But they want to exercise some caution because we don't know. And we do know that a longer fast is healthy if you're doing it under proper supervision and not taking crazy risks.
But just to reiterate, if you're going to look at 7-day fasting, you should get professional help to do that under doctor supervision or a fasting clinic. And but you think there is some benefit from doing, say, a 36-hour fast over and above? Would you combine that with saying, well, day to day I eat in a shortened window, and then maybe weekly I have a 36-hour fast? Is that a beneficial way to go about it?
So there are pros and cons. So the pros would be It seems to be the case that these deep repairs that I'm talking about that you get into after 12 hours, if you're doing a 16-hour fast, you're only in that deep repair for 4 hours. If you're doing a 36-hour fast, you're in those deep repairs for 20 hours. That's pretty awesome. So that would be the pro. The con, and there's a researcher who's really sort of raised this concern, who does very good work. His name is Sachin Panda. He's at the Salk Institute outside San Diego here in the States. And what he's concerned about is what he calls basically metabolic jet lag. He's afraid that if you sort of constantly start and stop when you're eating, when you're doing like a 36-hour food-free period or something, if you're doing that every week, you're sort of throwing yourself into jet lag. And see, the reason is our circadian clocks are controlled. Our circadian rhythms are controlled by two kinds of clock in our body. One is a master clock that's in our brain, and it's entrained by the light of daytime around us. That's what sets it. But then we have these peripheral clocks that are in all the cells practically of our body, and they are entrained by food. So if you're still seeing light, each morning, as you will when you're doing your 36-hour fast, but you're suspending food, the cue that your peripheral clocks are getting from food, your peripheral clocks become disjointed from your master clock. If you're doing one long fast of 7 days or 14 days, apparently our bodies are pretty good at figuring that out and handling it. But if you're constantly, taking these peripheral clocks offline and desyncing them from the master clock, there may be some price to be paid for that disruption. But again, it's a question. We don't know. It certainly seems to be the case if you're doing, as I tried about a decade ago, doing a every other day fast where you're fasting 36 hours every other day, and then refeeding during one day and then another 36 hours and then refeeding and so on. It was the worst month of my life. It was absolute hell. And I strongly suspect it was because of that decoupling. If you're only doing a 36-hour fast once a month or once a week, is that really going to cause you problems? We don't know.
Okay, but that idea of doing alternate day fasting may not be a good idea. But maybe a 36-hour fast. So it would be good. That I think that's probably actually quite a good story for most people, because if they think, okay, I can manage the reducing the time window that I'm eating, and then you're not telling me that I need to eat every alternate day as well, that's probably an easier thing to go about.
Right.
But equally, because I've done 36-hour fast and I don't find it a huge problem, but maybe that's something, a monthly thing would be actually maybe more beneficial than doing it more frequently may not be a good idea. Right.
It depends on what you're trying to achieve. If what you're looking for is sort of, health maintenance, mm-hmm. then a 36-hour fast once every 2 weeks or once every month or so, whatever, that may end up making great sense. If you're talking about disease reversal, then you're talking about getting into these longer fasts.
Yeah. And then we're looking at professional advice. But there is one other one, which is in the UK, been talked about a lot, which is 5-2, because a doctor, it's quite a long time ago now, a guy called Michael Mosley, who does a lot of work for the BBC, and he came up with this idea of 5-2 fasting, I don't think he came up with it, but he certainly publicized it, and he wrote a book about it. And it's with 5-2, they were talking about you actually were 2 days a week. You weren't fully eating nothing, but you were reducing calories to, I think, 25% of normal on 2 days a week. So is there any benefit to that sort of approach? Because I think that was done because people found it more manageable.
Yeah, so there are some benefits. One thing to be clear of up front, so we call it the 5-2 fasting or the 5-2 diet or something. One thing to know is it is not fasting, because when you are eating, there are various kinds of 5-2s. So on your 2 so-called fasting days, you might be eating as few as 500 calories. On some programs, it might be 800 calories or even 1,000 calories. Even if you're down at 500 calories, that is too many calories for your body to go into the fasting metabolism and get some of these deep repairs that I'm talking about. So you're not getting the repairs you get from fasting. Now, do you get benefit? Absolutely. There's benefit, as I mentioned earlier, from caloric restriction. It's not, so here's what people find. If you're normally eating 2,000 calories a day and you drop down to 500 calories on your fast day, then on your next eating day, you would think, well, I need to eat 3,500 calories to make up for the 1,500 calories that I missed. And on the 5-2 plan, you're usually allowed to eat whatever and however much you want on your feast days. Studies show that people don't do that. They end up not making up all of those 1,500 lost calories. They may make up 800 of them or even 1,000 of them or something like that, but they're in some kind of calorie deficit. And since most of us are overeating, we could use a calorie deficit. Most people end up losing some weight. When that happens, your blood pressure tends to drop. Your cholesterol, if it's high, tends to drop. Good things do happen, all right? However, it's not... if you're looking at those, what I would sort of call superficial markers, mind you, very important. I'm not, if you have high blood pressure, get it down, right? No doubt about it. But you're probably not going to be seeing, I imagine if you ran the sophisticated tests that some of these labs are doing in these fasting studies, you're not going to be seeing an increase in repair of DNA. You're not going to be seeing an increase in cellular recycling, that process of autophagy that I talked about. So it can be a very helpful tool. Now, it's not separate. You can do a 5-2 eating plan and still fast 18 hours a night if you want, right? So you could combine them if you wanted. Mm-hmm. But if I had to choose one or the other, if it were just me, I would choose the longer overnight eating fasting period and the earlier eating window, because I think you're going to get a lot of the exact same stuff that you get from the 5-2 way of eating, but you're also going to get these deeper repairs that are hidden from us most of the time, but will show up in 10 years in disease if we're not making them.
And so you said so eating sort of 500 calories that your body's, it knows is eating, you're not actually truly fasting. What about drinking? So I mean, I'm assuming if you're doing a 7-day fast, clearly you're drinking water. Is it just like pure water? Is there anything else you can drink? Or, on the shorter fast, would you try and, because I know some religious fasts, they actually don't even drink water. It's like, is water fully allowed, or is there other things you can drink? What about drinking? How does that come into it?
Yeah, so both with daily fasting and with prolonged fasting, for that matter, normal life, the best drink is just plain water. That is the drink that we evolved to drink, and it suits us extraordinarily well. During your fasting period, you do want to make sure, whether it's daily fasting or prolonged fasting, to get enough water. So you do want to do that. The question that everyone wants to know is, well, what about caffeine? Can I have my coffee? Mm-hmm. And the short answer is caffeine, whether it's in a caffeinated beverage or whether it's in a caloric beverage or not. So if you're drinking your coffee black, you don't have any cream, don't have any milk, you're drinking your, Earl Grey tea and you're not adding any milk to it. It's just the coffee, just the tea. It does disrupt a fast. The catch is we do not know. I keep saying the catch is, there are all these catches. The problem is that we do not know. The science is not good enough to say how it's disrupting the fast. Is it a big disruption? Is it a small disruption? Is it disrupting perhaps this repair, but maybe not that repair? We just don't have any idea. All right. So if you want to be absolutely safe, don't drink caffeinated beverages during your fasting window if you're aiming for that fasting window to get you repairs that will keep you healthier. The purest fasting doctors will say drink nothing but water. If you want a hot drink, heat it up. Less pure, those who do more of a compromise say, look, an herbal tea is not going to, cause you that much grief. A decaffeinated coffee is not going to, if it's truly decaffeinated and not loaded with the chemicals that a lot of them are decaffed with, if it's a healthy organic, whatever, it's not going to be much of a problem. But unfortunately for people who are wanting their, cup of caffeine, before their, when they get up in the morning and not break their fasting window, it seems like that's going to be a problem.
And wine and beer is definitely out.
Wine and beer is definitely out. It can be fun to drink, but it's not health food.
Yeah. So that's the problem with the win. And so what you're saying, because there is a social element as well, and I think that is important, because you said, and I think that was a good point. If you've got friends coming around, then friends coming around for dinner, okay, well that's fine. I'm going to eat dinner with my friends. We're in. I think this is. I can't remember when this episode's going out, but actually when we're recording it is end of November, start of December sort of time. So it's a holiday. So you've just had Thanksgiving. We've got Christmas coming up. It's a time when people do these sort of things, and there is a social element. I do think that is important as well. We're social animals, and so I quite like that idea. Is okay, yeah. Friday night, got friends coming around. We're going to eat with friends. That's what we do. It's nice. And then maybe have a glass of wine, and that's fine. But on other nights, you'd be like, okay, that eating window, if you're a 6-hour eating window and it's just mostly in the morning, then you're not drinking in the evening. Certainly not drinking alcoholic things, and a cup of coffee with milk and sugar, absolutely not. It's that would break your fast.
Correct.
Yeah.
So you have one of two choices, and I've chosen both of them because I like to have my cake and eat it too. Choice one is, as much as possible, try to reroute your social life. I've rather than having friends over for dinner Friday night, why don't you come over for lunch on Saturday and, we'll have a beer or a glass of wine with it. Now, mind you, I'm not advocating alcohol. I subscribe to the science that says there's no healthy amount, literally zero, and all of it's unhealthy, but that doesn't mean I never do it. So we often do things that aren't, perfectly healthy. But, I move my drinking, the rare times I do drink, I move it earlier in the day and try to get friends to go along with that. Or if it's just my wife and I at home, and we want to open a bottle of wine, we'll do it on Sunday afternoon at, 1 p.m. And what you quickly find is it's just as lovely as doing it at, Sunday night at 7 p.m. and will do you a whole lot less harm, it would seem. Choice two is to say, well, the world's not going to bend around my crazy new schedule, and just to accede to that. And I do that as well. So if I'm getting together with friends, I will go ahead and I will eat dinner with them. If there's, wine on the table, I will have a glass. But here's what my study of this, I did not eat this way. I did not drink this way before working on this book. It was coming to this science as I was researching this book that led me down this path. But what my research has told me is, look, so just don't eat a huge dinner and don't have 3 glasses of wine. Like, have a smaller dinner because you've eaten most of your calories earlier in the day anyway, and have a glass of wine, and you'll be doing your body, less harm. And I do find I sleep better. No surprise there when you're not drinking wine before bed. I feel better in the morning when I wake up. And those kind of incentives, those reinforcements are what help keep it going. But yeah, the flexibility, I think, we got to live in the world. And you're right, we're social creatures.
And so I think we've got an awful lot of information there. And I think that things that people could try from that. But to finish up, could you share a favorite anecdote from the long history of fasting?
Yeah, so it's less an anecdote than a study. It's one that we didn't get to yet. And it's about specifically fasting for multiple sclerosis. Well, I'll give you an anecdote and then I'll give you a study, if I may.
Yeah.
So the lead researcher and former director of the Buchinger Wilhelmi Clinic, which is the world's largest and one of the oldest fasting clinics in Germany. They have a campus in Spain as well. Fasted people for 100 years. I think they've fasted more than 250,000 people in their time. Françoise Wilhelmi de Toledo, this research director, told me this story of a young man who had multiple sclerosis. And he was told by his doctors, there's nothing we can do for, like, he was nearing the end, in effect. And they said, you're beyond hope, in effect. He couldn't walk in the door of the clinic. He couldn't sign his name when he arrived. He fasted there for 2 weeks at Buchinger Wilhelmi, stayed another week, I think it was, to refeed. And at the end of those 3 weeks, he walked out of there under his own power and was able to sign his name. Now, he wasn't cured, all right? But he had a regression of his symptoms. And these kinds of heartwarming stories have been told by fasting doctors throughout at least the last century about people who are struggling with multiple sclerosis. And the study that I will talk about, and I know you had Valter Longo, the professor at the University of Southern California, who's one of the world's leading experts in fasting on the program a couple of years ago. And I know he talked about his study, but I frankly don't think he stated it in strong enough terms. So I'll tell you what he found. This was done in 2016. It was a study with mice, and he found these were mice who had been given a mouse model of multiple sclerosis, slightly different from the human model, but essentially the same thing. He put them on 3 days of a fasting mimicking diet, which is a very low calorie, it'd be the equivalent of about 200 calories a day for us, diet that mimics many of the effects of fasting. You get many of the same repairs, even though you're taking a few calories. 3 days on this diet, then 4 days of normal eating. He did this 3 times, all right in sequence. He found that the inflammation in the mice dropped pretty radically. He also found that these FMD cycles not only prevented demyelination and damage to the axons, which, as you know, are the parts of the nerve that conduct impulses, but also began to remyelinate some of the stripped off myelination on those same parts of the nerves. In consequence, the mice did better on motor tests. They did better on mental tests. And here was the sleeper headline that didn't make headlines anywhere, but should have. 20% of these mice appear to have been cured. All their symptoms were gone. Absolutely everything, that the researchers checked to see where is the MS, it was gone. So a pretty moderate amount of fasting cured MS in mice. Hello, that's a huge headline, right? It was so promising that Longo started a very small, human pilot study. It was very simple. It was just, we'll put you on a similar fasting mimicking diet for 1 7-day cycle. And then we're going to check you 6 months later. I mean, that's a very easy amount of fasting, and because it's a fasting mimicking diet, much easier to do than actual fasting. 6 months later, we're going to check how you are. Their EDSS score, their expanded disability status score, in fact, did decrease. Their MS had improved with just that very limited amount of fasting. So this has been so good that Longo, over the last few years, he and other researchers have been conducting trials in, MS, people with MS, with various kinds of diet and fasting mimicking diet to see if he can replicate some of the success he had in mice more broadly. Now, to me, the importance of all this is this. We know that medically supervised prolonged fasting is safe. We know that even if it didn't help your MS, it would absolutely help with other things. It makes other repairs when we do these longer fasts. So there's no cost other than the literal cost of paying a fasting clinic, but there's no physical cost or anything. There's no risk to doing a medically supervised fast. So what I hope will eventually come out of this is enough awareness that people will, that people with MS will say, well, what do I have to lose? If I have the time, if I can take 2 or 3 weeks, why don't I go and fast at a fasting clinic and see how it affects me? If it doesn't help at all, fine. I don't have to go back. If it does, maybe I want to do this every year.
And that was going to be the last point. But there's one